Blood and bruises marked Katherine Blackwell's porcelain skin as she stumbled through the moonlit prairie, her swollen eye barely able to distinguish the silhouettes of distant mountains against the Nebraska night sky. The year was 1873, and the small town of Sweetwater was miles behind her, along with the man who had sworn to love and cherish her until death parted them. The summer night air clung to her skin, warm and thick, offering little comfort as she dragged herself forward. Her dress, once a pretty calico print, was now torn and stained with her own blood. The beating had been worse than ever before Thomas had returned home drunk from the saloon, rage in his eyes as he reminded her yet again of her failure to provide him with sons. 5 years of marriage and her womb remained empty. "Worthless woman," he had snarled, his fist connecting with her cheek. "My father warned me about you, said you looked too frail to bear children." Katherine had endured his cruelty before, but tonight something inside her had finally broken. When Thomas had collapsed into a drunken stupor, she had gathered what little she could carry and fled into the night. No destination in mind, just away, far away. Now, hours later, her strength was failing. The tall grass whipped against her skirts as she pushed forward, each step becoming heavier than the last. In the distance, a pinprick of light caught her eye. A campfire. She altered her course toward it, hoping for mercy from whoever tended the flames. As she drew closer, she could make out the shape of a covered wagon and a solitary figure seated before the fire. A horse nickered softly, sensing her approach before its master did. "Hello," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I need help." The figure at the campfire rose immediately, hand moving to the gun at his hip. Katherine froze, suddenly aware of how dangerous her situation might be. A woman alone, approaching a stranger's camp in the dead of night. "Who's there?" The voice was deep, cautious, but not immediately threatening. "My name is Katherine Blackwell," she replied, taking a tentative step forward into the glow of the firelight. I'm lost." The man's silhouette stiffened as the firelight revealed her battered face. He holstered his gun and moved toward her with careful, measured steps. "Good Lord, madam. What happened to you?" Katherine opened her mouth to speak, but exhaustion and pain overwhelmed her. Her legs buckled beneath her, and the world went black when she awoke. Dawn was breaking over the prairie. She was lying on a bedroll beneath a wool blanket, the campfire reduced to embers nearby. Every inch of her body ached, but someone had cleaned the blood from her face and placed a cool, damp cloth on her forehead. "You're awake." The voice came from a man seated on a log a few feet away, whittling a piece of wood. He looked to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, she noticed, were a startling shade of blue-kind eyes that held no judgment as they met hers. "My name is Ethan Quinn," he said, setting aside his carving. "I was heading to Caldwell to deliver some horses." He nodded toward a small herd grazing nearby, tethered loosely to ensure they wouldn't wander. "Found you half dead on the prairie instead." Katherine tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "Careful now," Ethan said, moving to help her. "I'm no doctor, but I reckon you might have some broken ribs." "Thank you," she whispered, accepting the canteen he offered, "for helping me. No decent man would do otherwise." His gaze lingered on the bruises that bloomed across her face and neck. "Was it your husband?" Katherine flinched, turning away. "You don't have to talk about it," Ethan said quietly. "But if he's looking for you, I should know, for both our sakes." "Yes," she finally admitted. "My husband Thomas, he's in Sweetwater. I ran away last night." Ethan nodded slowly. "Sweetwater's a good 20 miles back. He won't find you easily, but we should keep moving." "Can you ride?" Katherine hesitated. I haven't in years." Thomas didn't approve of women on horseback. Something like anger flashed in Ethan's eyes, but his voice remained gentle. "We'll go slow then. I can't leave you out here, and I've got business in Caldwell that won't wait." "Why are you helping me?" Katherine asked, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You don't know me." Ethan stood, moving to tend to the horses. "My mother used to say that a man's character is judged by how he treats those who can't repay him." He turned back to her, his expression solemn. "Besides, no woman deserves to be treated like that, no matter what." By mid-morning they were traveling across the prairie, Katherine seated awkwardly on a gentle mare Ethan called Daisy. Her body protested every movement, but the alternative, returning to Thomas, was unthinkable. "What's in Caldwell?" she asked as they rode side by side, the small herd of horses following behind, guided by Ethan's skilled whistles and occasional commands. "I break horses for a living," he explained. "Got 5 Mustangs trained for a rancher named Hollister. Good money if he pays what he promised." "And after that," Ethan shrugged, "wherever the work takes me. I've been wandering since the war ended." "You fought?" Katherine asked, noticing for the first time a slight stiffness in the way he held his left shoulder. "Union cavalry. Got this shoulder shot up at Gettysburg, but I was one of the lucky ones. Came back in one piece, more or less." His gaze drifted to the horizon. "Found my family farm burned to the ground. No reason to stay in Virginia after that." Katherine felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry." "Long time ago now," he said, though something in his voice suggested the wounds hadn't fully healed. "What about you? Where are you heading?" The question caught Katherine off guard. In her desperation to escape, she hadn't thought beyond survival. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have an aunt in Colorado, but I haven't seen her in years. I don't even know if she's still alive." Ethan studied her thoughtfully. "Caldwell's a growing town. Might be work for a woman who's willing. What skills do you have?" Katherine's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. What skills did she have? Thomas had never allowed her to work, insisting that her sole purpose was to maintain their home and bear his children. Her failure at the latter had been the source of his escalating cruelty. "I can cook," she offered weakly. "And so? I used to help my father in his store before I married, so I can keep accounts." Ethan nodded encouragingly. "That's more than most. The hotel in Caldwell might be hiring, or the general store. It's not much, but it could be a start until you decide what to do next." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic swaying of the horses lulling Katherine into a state of calm she hadn't felt in years. The vast openness of the prairie, which had terrified her the previous night, now felt like freedom. "Tell me about Caldwell," she said after a while. "It's a cattle town, mostly. Started booming after they put the railroad through a few years back. Rough around the edges like most frontier towns, but growing fast. There's a church, a school, even talk of a proper courthouse being built next year." He glanced at her. "Not the sort of place a lady like yourself would normally choose." Katherine surprised herself by laughing, a small, painful sound given her injuries, but genuine nonetheless. "A lady like myself wouldn't be riding across the prairie with a stranger after fleeing her husband." "I think we're well past concerns of propriety, Mr. Quinn." The corner of Ethan's mouth quirked upward. "Fair point, Mrs. Blackwell, and please call me Ethan. Then you must call me Katherine." As the sun climbed higher, the heat became oppressive. Ethan suggested they rest in the shade of a small copse of trees near a creek. He helped Katherine dismount, his strong hands careful around her waist, mindful of her injuries. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her chest that she quickly dismissed as gratitude. While the horses drank from the creek, Ethan prepared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and dried apples. Katherine winced as she lowered herself to sit on a fallen log, her body stiff from riding. "Been a while since you were on horseback, I take it," Ethan observed, handing her a portion of food. "Years," she confirmed. "Thomas didn't approve of many things." "Sounds like a real charmer," Ethan said dryly. Katherine stared at the food in her hands. "He wasn't always cruel. When we first married, he was kind, attentive even. But after the first year passed without a child, he changed. Started drinking more, blamed me for being barren." Her voice caught on the word. "Each year that passed, he grew more resentful." "It takes two to make a child," Ethan said quietly. "Could be him as easily as you." Katherine shook her head. "That's not how Thomas saw it. A man's virility isn't questioned, only a woman's worth." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's horse shit, excuse my language. A woman's worth isn't measured by the children she bears." "In Thomas's world it is," Katherine replied, feeling the familiar weight of shame pressing down on her. "His family name, his legacy, that's all that mattered to him in the end." "And what matters to you, Katherine?" The question startled her. For so long her own wants and needs had been secondary to Thomas's demands and disappointments. What did matter to her? "Peace," she finally said. "Safety. Maybe a chance to feel useful again, to not be afraid." Ethan nodded solemnly. "Simple things that everyone deserves." He stood, offering her his canteen. "We should get moving if we want to reach Caldwell by tomorrow evening." As they continued their journey, Katherine found herself studying Ethan when he wasn't looking. There was a quiet strength about him, different from Thomas's imposing presence. Ethan's power seemed to come from within a certainty about who he was and what he believed. It had been a long time since Katherine had been around a man who didn't make her feel small. That evening, they made camp beside a small pond. Ethan built a fire and showed Katherine how to construct a lean-to for privacy. He insisted on sleeping outside near the horses, giving her the small space beneath the wagon. As darkness fell, Katherine found herself unable to sleep, haunted by the fear that Thomas might be tracking her. "Ethan," she called softly. "Yes." His voice came immediately from beside the fire. "Do you think he'll come after me?" There was a long pause. "Hard to say. Some men can't stand losing what they consider theirs, even if they didn't value it properly. Others move on, find someone new to torment." "He has a rifle," Katherine whispered, "and he's a good shot." She heard Ethan shift. "I have a rifle too, Katherine, and I was cavalry. I won't let him hurt you again." The fierce certainty in his voice should have frightened her, but instead it brought comfort. Katherine closed her eyes, allowing sleep to claim her at last. The next day dawned clear and bright. Katherine woke feeling stronger, though her bruises had darkened to angry purple-black marks across her skin. Ethan had coffee brewing when she emerged from beneath the wagon. "Morning," he greeted her, handing her a tin cup. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," she admitted. "Thank you." They ate a quick breakfast before breaking camp, falling into an easy routine as if they'd been traveling together for weeks rather than a single day. Katherine found herself watching Ethan's capable hands as he packed the wagon and saddled the horses, noting the gentle way he handled the animals, speaking to them in low, soothing tones. "You're good with them," she observed as he adjusted Daisy's saddle for her. "Horses are honest creatures," Ethan replied. "They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not. Treat them with respect and they'll do the same for you." "Is that why you prefer their company to people?" Katherine asked, surprised at her own boldness. Ethan laughed, a warm, rich sound that made her smile in response. "Maybe so, though the company's improved considerably in the last day or two." Katherine felt herself blush, unused to compliments after years of criticism. She busied herself with adjusting her skirts as Ethan helped her onto Daisy's back. They traveled steadily throughout the morning, the the landscape gradually changing as they moved west. The flat prairie gave way to gently rolling hills, and in the far distance, Katherine could see the blue smudge of mountains against the horizon. "That's the beginning of the Rockies," Ethan told her, following her gaze. "Still a good few days' ride away, but they look closer than they are." "Your aunt in Colorado, whereabouts does she live?" "Denver," Katherine replied. "At least, that's where she was when I last heard from her." "My father's sister, Abigail." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's growing fast since they found gold. Rough place, but there's opportunity there." "Have you been?" Katherine asked. "Passed through a couple of times. Too crowded for my taste. Too many men with gold fever and not enough sense." He glanced at her. "But it might be a good place for a fresh start if your aunt's still there." Katherine considered this. A fresh start. The idea both terrified and exhilarated her. She had been Katherine Blackwell, Thomas's wife, for so long that she hardly remembered who she had been before Katherine Bennett, the shopkeeper's daughter with dreams of her own. "I don't know if I'm brave enough," she admitted. "Seems to me you've already proven your courage," Ethan said quietly. "Takes a certain kind of strength to leave everything you know, even when staying is worse." Katherine didn't respond, touched by his assessment of her. No one had called her brave before. As the sun began to westering, Ethan pointed to a distant plume of smoke on the horizon. "That's Caldwell. We'll be there before nightfall." Katherine felt a surge of anxiety. The town represented both sanctuary and uncertainty. What would she do there? Where would she stay? How would she support herself? And most frightening of all, what if Thomas came looking for her? "Ethan," she began hesitantly, "when we reach town, I have no money. Thomas controlled everything. I don't even have enough for a room at the hotel." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I have money coming from this job, enough to see you settled until you can find work. You can pay me back when you're able." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Ethan interrupted firmly. "It's a loan, not charity, and in the meantime there's a widow named Mrs. Peterson who sometimes takes in boarders. Decent woman, doesn't ask too many questions. I'll speak to her on your behalf." Katherine swallowed past the lump in her throat. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Ethan looked at her directly, his blue eyes serious. "Because someone once showed me kindness when I needed it most. After the war, when I had nothing left. A stranger gave me a chance." He shrugged. "Besides, I've never been able to abide a bully, and that's what your husband is. A bully with a wedding ring doesn't make him any less contemptible." As they approached Caldwell, the town gradually came into focus. It was larger than Sweetwater, with a proper main street lined with false-fronted buildings. A church spire rose above the other structures, and the railroad station bustled with activity even as the day waned. Katherine felt exposed as they rode down the main street, painfully aware of her bruised face and disheveled appearance. People turned to stare at the strange procession, Ethan leading his small herd of horses, with Katherine riding alongside. She kept her head down, shame washing over her even though she knew she had done nothing wrong. Ethan seemed to sense her discomfort. "Just a little further," he assured her quietly. "Hollister's ranch is on the edge of town." The Hollister ranch was an impressive spread with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Quinn, about time you showed up. Thought maybe you'd run off with my horses and my money." The man, presumably Hollister, was heavyset with a thick gray beard and shrewd eyes that immediately assessed the animals Ethan had brought. "Got delayed," Ethan replied simply, dismounting. "But I delivered as promised. 5 Mustangs, all broke and ready to work." Hollister grunted, his gaze shifting to Katherine. His eyes narrowed at the sight of her bruised face, but he made no comment, turning his attention back to the horses. "Let's see what you've brought me." For the next hour, Katherine watched as Ethan demonstrated each horse's training, showing how they responded to commands, accepted riders, and performed basic tasks. Hollister nodded approvingly, finally reaching into his pocket to count out payment. "Good work, Quinn. These'll do nicely." He handed over a stack of bills. "You passing through or sticking around?" "Haven't decided," Ethan replied, tucking the money into his vest. "Got some business to attend to in town first." Hollister's eyes flickered to Katherine again. "I see. Well, if you're looking for more work, Mason over at the Triple R is short-handed, paying good wages for experienced hands. I'll keep it in mind. Obliged." Ethan tipped his hat, then turned back to Katherine. "Ready to head into town?" Katherine nodded, relieved to be leaving Hollister's scrutiny behind. As they rode away, she asked, "Will you take the job at the Triple R?" Ethan shrugged. "Might, depends." "On what?" "On whether there's reason to stay in Caldwell a while." His gaze met hers briefly before returning to the road ahead. Katherine felt a strange flutter in her stomach at his words. Was she the reason he might consider staying? The idea both thrilled and frightened her. She had only just escaped one man's control. The last thing she needed was to become dependent on another. Yet Ethan had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. He had helped her without demands or expectations. They reached the town proper as dusk was settling. Ethan led them to a modest two-story house set back from the main street, with a well-tended garden and clean curtains in the windows. "Mrs. Peterson's place," he explained, helping Katherine dismount. "Wait here a moment." Katherine stood beside Daisy, nervously smoothing her tattered dress as Ethan approached the house and knocked on the door. A small, gray-haired woman answered, her expression suspicious, until she recognized Ethan. They conversed briefly, the woman glancing past him to where Katherine waited. After a moment, she nodded and gestured for Katherine to approach. "Mrs. Peterson, this is Katherine Blackwell," Ethan said as Katherine joined them. "Katherine, Mrs. Peterson has agreed to let you board with her for a while." "Temporarily, Mrs." Peterson clarified, her sharp eyes taking in Katherine's bruised face. "I run a respectable house, Mrs. Blackwell. No gentlemen callers, no drinking, no causing trouble." "Of course," Katherine agreed quickly. "I assure you I won't be any trouble." Mrs. Peterson's expression softened slightly. "Ethan says you're in need of a fresh start. I won't pry into your business, but I expect honesty. If there's trouble following you, I need to know about it." Katherine hesitated, looking to Ethan for guidance. He nodded encouragingly. "My husband," she admitted quietly. "I left him. He was cruel. I don't know if he'll come looking for me." To her surprise, Mrs. Peterson merely nodded as if this was a common enough story. "I see. Well, you'll be safe enough here. Sheriff Mason is a good man, and this town doesn't take kindly to outsiders causing problems." She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, then. You look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bath." Katherine turned to Ethan, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had become her protector. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything." "I'll come by tomorrow," he promised. "Need to see about that job, and we should talk to the sheriff, let him know your situation." "You don't have to, I want to," Ethan interrupted gently. "Get some rest, Katherine. You're safe now, as Mrs. Peterson ushered her inside. Katherine glanced back to see Ethan still standing there, watching until the door closed between them. The next week passed in a blur of new experiences for Katherine. Mrs. Peterson proved to be a stern but fair landlady, providing Katherine with clean clothes, regular meals, and a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house. In return, Katherine helped with household chores and cooking, grateful for the roof over her head and the woman's discreet protection. Ethan had taken the job at the Triple R Ranch, riding out each morning and returning to town in the evenings. True to his word, he had accompanied Katherine to the sheriff's office the day after their arrival, explaining her situation in calm, measured terms. Sheriff Mason, a weathered man with kind eyes, had listened attentively, making notes in a leather-bound book. "If your husband shows up in Caldwell, Mrs. Blackwell, we'll have a word with him. I don't abide men who raise their hands to women, married or not." "Thank you, Sheriff," Katherine had replied, touched by the man's straightforward support. "In the meantime," Mason continued, "I recommend you keep a low profile. Caldwell's a small town, but we get our share of travelers passing through. Best if word of your whereabouts doesn't reach Sweetwater." Katherine had taken his advice to heart, venturing out only when necessary. To her surprise, Mrs. Peterson had connections throughout town and had arranged an interview for Katherine at the general store, where the owner needed help with bookkeeping and serving customers. Mr. Forrester, the proprietor, was a serious man with spectacles and a meticulous nature that matched Katherine's own. He had hired her on the spot after seeing her careful handwriting and quick mind for figures. "My wife used to handle the books," he explained, "but her eyesight's failing. Having you here will be a blessing, Mrs. Blackwell." Now, a week after arriving in Caldwell, Katherine stood behind the counter of Forrester's general store, carefully recording the day's sales in a leather-bound ledger. The work was satisfying, reminding her of the hours she had spent helping in her father's store before her marriage. Mr. Forrester paid her fairly, and the routine of the workday kept her mind from dwelling too much on fears of Thomas finding her. The bell above the door jingled, and Katherine looked up to see Ethan entering the store. Her heart gave a small, involuntary leap at the sight of him, something that had been happening with increasing frequency whenever he appeared. "Afternoon, Katherine," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Busy day, steady," she replied with a smile. "Mr. Forrester went to the bank, so I'm minding the store. What brings you to town so early? Finished breaking that new stallion for the Triple R. Mason gave me the afternoon off." Ethan leaned against the counter, his presence filling the small space with a comforting warmth. "Thought I might see if you'd like to take a walk when you're done here. Weather's fine." Katherine glanced out the window at the clear blue sky, the idea of spending time with Ethan outside of Mrs. Peterson's watchful eye was appealing, but she hesitated. "I'm not sure if I should." "It's just a walk," Ethan said gently. "In broad daylight in the middle of town, nothing improper about it." Katherine found herself nodding. "All right, I finish at 5. Ethan's smile brightened his entire face. "I'll be back at 5 then." After he left, Katherine found it hard to concentrate on her work. The prospect of spending time with Ethan both excited and unnerved her. Over the past week, he had been a steadfast presence, checking on her daily, bringing small gifts, a book to read, fresh apples from the ranch orchard, a delicate handkerchief he'd purchased from the dry goods store. Each gesture touched her deeply. Yet Katherine remained cautious. Her experience with Thomas had taught her that men could change, that kindness could curdle into cruelty. And even if Ethan truly was the good man he seemed to be, Katherine wasn't certain she was ready to trust her heart to anyone again. At precisely 5 o'clock, Mr. Forrester returned and Katherine was free to leave. Ethan was waiting outside, hat in hand, his blue eyes lighting up when he saw her. "Ready?" he asked. Katherine nodded, falling into step beside him. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, heading toward the small park at the edge of town where a few benches had been placed beneath shade trees. "How are you settling in?" Ethan asked as they sat on a bench overlooking a small creek. "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted. The work at the store suits me, and Mrs. Peterson has been kind in her own way. And the nightmares, are they easing? Katherine glanced at him, surprised he had noticed. She had woken several times in the night, crying out, only to have Mrs. Peterson bring her tea and sit with her until she calmed. She hadn't realized Ethan knew about these episodes. Mrs. Peterson mentioned them, he explained, seeing her confusion. She's worried about you. They're less frequent now, Katherine said softly, but I keep thinking I see him. On the street, in the store, just glimpses that make my heart stop, even though I know it can't be him. Ethan's hand moved as if to cover hers, then hesitated, returning to his lap. It's natural to be afraid after what you've been through, but you're stronger than you know, Katherine. Am I? She asked, a tremor in her voice. I stayed with him for 5 years, Ethan. I endured his cruelty, his drunken rages, his hands on me. Her voice broke. What kind of strength is that? The kind that survives, Ethan said firmly. The kind that keeps going day after day, hoping for better. And the kind that finally says enough and walks away, no matter how terrifying the alternative might be. He turned to face her directly. You didn't just run from Thomas, Katherine. You ran towards something, a chance at a different life. Katherine was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words. I don't know what that life looks like yet, she finally said. I've been someone's daughter and someone's wife. I'm not sure I know how to just be me. Maybe that's the adventure, Ethan suggested. Discovering who Katherine really is. She smiled faintly. Perhaps. They sat in companionable silence, watching the creek flow past, until the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. As dusk approached, Ethan escorted Katherine back to Mrs. Peterson's house, stopping at the gate. Thank you for the walk, Katherine said. It was nice to be outside without being afraid. My pleasure. Ethan hesitated, then added, There's a social at the church on Saturday evening. Nothing fancy, just music and food. Thought you might like to go. Katherine felt a flutter of anticipation. I'd like that. Good. Ethan smiled, tipping his hat. I'll call for you at 7 then. As Katherine watched him walk away, she felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, a tentative hope for the future, a sense that perhaps there might be happiness waiting for her after all. The church social was a lively affair, with nearly everyone in Caldwell in attendance. Tables laden with food lined one wall of the church hall, while a small group of musicians played cheerful tunes in the corner. Children darted between the adults, playing games of tag despite their parents' admonishments to behave. Katherine had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple blue dress Mrs. Peterson had lent her. She had pinned her hair up carefully, covering the last fading bruises on her face with powder. When Ethan arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze made her blush. He himself had made an effort, wearing a clean shirt and vest, his usually tousled hair slicked back neatly. You look beautiful, he said simply, offering her his arm. At the social, Katherine was introduced to what seemed like half the town. Ethan knew everyone, it seemed, and they in turn clearly respected him. Women young and old greeted him warmly, several casting speculative glances between him and Katherine. Ethan Quinn, is this the lady you've been hiding away? Teased a plump woman in a floral dress. I'm Martha Williams, dear. My husband owns the livery. We've been trying to get Ethan to settle down for years. Katherine felt her cheeks grow warm. We're just friends. Ethan helped me when I first arrived in town. Martha's knowing smile suggested she didn't entirely believe this explanation, but she didn't press the issue. Well, we're glad to have you in Caldwell, Mrs. Blackwell. Any friend of Ethan's is welcome here. As the evening progressed, Katherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the simple pleasure of community gathering. She danced once with Ethan, a sedate waltz that nevertheless left her breathless, acutely aware of his hand at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers. "You dance well," she remarked as the music ended. "My mother insisted I learn," Ethan replied with a small smile. Said no son of hers would clod around a dance floor like a bear. The mention of his mother made Katherine curious. Ethan rarely spoke of his past. "Tell me about her," she urged as they moved to the refreshment table. Ethan's expression grew distant. "She was a strong woman. Raised 3 boys mostly on her own after my father died. Taught school before she married, so she made sure we all knew our letters and numbers." He smiled at some memory. "Had a temper, though. Wooden spoon was her weapon of choice when we stepped out of line. And your brothers? Are they still in Virginia?" The light in Ethan's eyes dimmed. "No, both fought in the war. John died at Antietam, Michael at Cold Harbor." Katherine touched his arm gently. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He covered her hand with his own for a brief moment. "Long time ago now." The intimacy of the moment was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Mason, his expression grave. "Ethan, Mrs. Blackwell, might I have a word?" Katherine felt a chill run through her as they followed the sheriff to a quiet corner of the hall. "What is it, Sheriff?" Ethan asked. "Got a telegram from the sheriff in Sweetwater this afternoon," Mason said, keeping his voice low. "Seems your husband's been asking questions. Mrs. Blackwell. Heard from a cattle driver that he saw a woman matching your description in Caldwell." Katherine's hand flew to her mouth, fear gripping her heart. "He's coming here. The telegram didn't say for certain, but I thought you should be warned. If Thomas Blackwell shows up in my town causing trouble, he'll find himself in my jail. But it might be best if you kept your head down for a while." "Thank you for telling us, Sheriff," Ethan said, his face hardened with concern. As Mason walked away, Katherine felt the room spinning around her. The safety she had begun to feel in Caldwell suddenly seemed fragile, illusory. "Katherine." Ethan's voice brought her back to the present. "Look at me, you're safe, I won't let him hurt you." "You don't understand," she whispered. "Thomas is. When he drinks, he's dangerous. And he always has his rifle. He could hurt you or Mrs. Peterson or anyone who tries to help me." Ethan's jaw set in a determined line. "I fought in a war, Katherine. I'm not afraid of a bully with a bottle and a gun." He took her trembling hands in his. "But if you want to leave Caldwell, say the word. I'll take you to Denver to find your aunt, or anywhere else you want to go." The offer stunned her. "You would do that? Leave your job, the life you're building here, in a heartbeat," he replied without hesitation. Katherine stared at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. In that moment, she realized that what she felt for this man went beyond gratitude or friendship. Somehow, in the short time she had known him, Ethan Quinn had become essential to her happiness. "I don't want to run anymore," she said finally. "I've spent too long being afraid. If Thomas comes to Caldwell, then I'll face him, with the law on my side this time." Ethan nodded, respect evident in his gaze. "Then we'll face him together. But for tonight, try not to worry. Enjoy the dance." They rejoined the festivities, but Katherine's earlier ease had vanished. Every time the door opened, she tensed, half expecting to see Thomas's hulking frame silhouetted against the light. Ethan stayed close, his protective presence both comforting and concerning. What if Thomas hurt him? The thought of Ethan coming to harm because of her was unbearable. Over the past weeks, he had become more important to her than she wanted to admit, even to herself. His quiet strength, his unfailing kindness, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, all had worked their way into her heart, despite her determination to remain independent. The social ended around 10, and Ethan walked Katherine back to Mrs. Peterson's house, both of them silent, lost in their own thoughts. At the gate, Katherine turned to him. "I'm sorry for ruining the evening," she said. You didn't ruin anything, Ethan assured her, but I'm worried about you. Promise me you won't go anywhere alone for the next few days. Let me escort you to and from the store. Katherine started to protest, then thought better of it. All right. Ethan reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Get some rest. I'll see you in the morning. As Katherine watched him walk away, she was struck by the urge to call him back to ask him to stay near. Instead, she turned and entered the house, locking the door firmly behind her. The next few days passed in tense anticipation. Katherine went about her duties at the store, but her mind was elsewhere, jumping at every sound, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face that entered. Ethan was true to his word, escorting her to work each morning and back to Mrs. Peterson's each evening. The Triple R Ranch was understanding about his altered schedule, a fact that suggested Ethan had explained at least part of the situation to his employer. On Wednesday afternoon, the bell above the door jingled as Katherine was restocking a shelf with canned goods. She turned, expecting to see Mr. Forrester returning from his lunch, only to freeze in horror at the sight of Thomas Blackwell's broad frame filling the doorway. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall and imposing, with a thick, dark beard and cold eyes that could turn from charm to cruelty in an instant. He was sober at the moment, his gaze sharp as it settled on her. "There you are," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Been looking all over for my runaway wife." Katherine took an instinctive step backward, her heart hammering in her chest. "Thomas." He advanced into the store, removing his hat. To anyone watching, he might have appeared to be a husband making a routine visit to his wife, but Katherine could see the rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "You've led me on quite a chase," Thomas continued, glancing around the empty store. "Took me a while to figure out where you'd gone. Smart, coming this far west." "What do you want, Thomas?" Katherine managed to ask, her voice surprisingly steady despite her fear. "What do I want?" he laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "I want my wife to come home where she belongs. I want the woman who swore before God to honor and obey me to keep her vows." His expression hardened. "I want what's mine." Katherine gripped the edge of the counter for support. "I'm not going back with you, not ever." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Is that right? And who's going to stop me from taking you? That cowboy who's been sniffing around you, the sheriff. This isn't your home, Katherine. These aren't your people. You belong to me." "I don't belong to anyone," Katherine said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. "And if you try to force me to go with you, I'll scream this building down. Everyone in town knows what you did to me. They've seen the bruises." Something ugly flashed across Thomas's face. "You always were too proud for your own good. Thought you were better than me because your father had a store and you could read fancy books." He took another step toward her. "But you're just a barren woman who couldn't do the one thing a wife is supposed to do, give her husband sons." The old shame rose in Katherine, but alongside it came a new emotion, anger. "I may not have given you children, Thomas, but that doesn't make me worthless, and it certainly doesn't give you the right to beat me." Thomas's hand twitched at his side as if he was fighting the urge to strike her. "You're coming home with me, Katherine, one way or another." The bell above the door jingled again, and Katherine felt a rush of relief as Mr. Forrester entered, followed immediately by Ethan. One look at the tableau before them and both men's expressions hardened. "Everything all right, Mrs. Blackwell?" Mr. Forrester asked, moving to stand beside her behind the counter. "No, sir," Katherine replied, never taking her eyes off Thomas. "This is my husband from Sweetwater. He was just leaving." Thomas turned to face Ethan, sizing him up with a contemptuous glance. "So you're the cowboy who thinks he can steal another man's wife?" "I haven't stolen anything," Ethan replied, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "Mrs. Blackwell came to Caldwell of her own free will after you nearly beat her to death. What happens between a man and his wife is private business," Thomas sneered. "No concern of yours." "It became my concern when I found her half dead on the prairie," Ethan said. "And it's the law's concern, too. Sheriff Mason would be mighty interested in hearing why Mrs. Blackwell's face was black and blue when she arrived in town." Thomas's hand moved toward his belt where Katherine knew he kept a knife. "You threatening me, boy?" "No threat," Ethan replied calmly. "Just telling you how things stand in Caldwell. Mrs. Blackwell has friends here. People who care about her welfare. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go." Thomas's gaze shifted between Ethan and Katherine, calculation in his eyes. "This isn't over," he finally said. "I'll be at the hotel. Think about what you're throwing away, Katherine. Your home, your marriage vows. Your immortal soul." With that parting shot, he jammed his hat back on his head and stormed out of the store, leaving a tense silence in his wake. Katherine's knees buckled, and she sank onto the stool behind the counter. Ethan was at her side in an instant. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. "He found me," she whispered. "Just like I knew he would." Mr. Forrester cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwell, why don't you take the rest of the day off? I can manage the store." Katherine nodded gratefully, allowing Ethan to help her to her feet. As they left the store, she was acutely aware of eyes following them from other businesses along the street. News traveled fast in small towns, and Thomas's arrival would already be the subject of speculation. "We need to tell Sheriff Mason," Ethan said as they walked briskly toward the sheriff's office. Thomas made what sounded like a threat in there. Katherine nodded numbly, still processing the shock of seeing her husband after weeks of freedom. The fear was there, yes, but underneath it was something else, a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. She would not go back to that life of fear and pain, not even if it meant facing Thomas's wrath. Sheriff Mason was cleaning his gun when they entered his office. One look at Katherine's pale face told him all he needed to know. "Blackwell's in town," he guessed, setting aside his weapon. "He came to the store," Katherine confirmed. "He wants me to go back with him." Mason's expression was grave. "Did he threaten you? Physically, I mean." "Not in so many words," Katherine replied, "but I know Thomas. He won't leave without me." "He implied he'd use force if necessary," Ethan added. "I'm concerned for Mrs. Blackwell's safety." Mason stood, reaching for his hat. "I'll have a word with Mr. Blackwell, make the law clear to him. In the meantime, Mrs. Blackwell, I suggest you stay close to home. And Quinn, keep an eye out." "I intend to," Ethan replied grimly. As they left the sheriff's office, Katherine felt as if a dark cloud had descended over the bright future she had begun to envision for herself in Caldwell. Thomas's presence tainted everything, reminding her that she wasn't truly free. "He won't give up," she said softly as they walked toward Mrs. Peterson's house. "You don't know him like I do. When Thomas wants something, he doesn't stop until he gets it." Ethan's jaw clenched. "He doesn't get to have you, not unless that's what you want." Katherine looked up at him, startled by the vehemence in his voice. "Of course it isn't what I want, but under the law I'm still his wife. He has rights over me." "Not the right to hurt you," Ethan insisted. "Not here, not now." He stopped, turning to face her fully. "Katherine, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." Her heart fluttered nervously. "What is it? Do you have any feelings left for Thomas? Any part of you that wants to reconcile with him?" The question caught her off guard. Did she have feelings for Thomas? Once, certainly. She had loved him when they married, or at least thought she did. But now, no, she said firmly. "Whatever I felt for him died a long time ago, beaten out of me year by year. All I feel now is fear and pity." Ethan nodded, relief evident in his expression. Then we'll find a way through this, together. They had reached Mrs. Peterson's gate. The older woman was watching from the window, her face creased with concern. Clearly, news of Thomas's arrival had reached her as well. "I should go in," Katherine said reluctantly. "Mrs. Peterson will be worried." "I'll be back this evening," Ethan promised, "and tomorrow morning to escort you to work." "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." As she turned to go, Ethan caught her hand. "Katherine." His voice was low, urgent. "You're worth more than the sons you never gave him. You know that, don't you?" The words struck her with the force of revelation. For so long, she had internalized Thomas's judgment of her worth, defined herself by her failure to conceive. Hearing Ethan state so plainly what she had been afraid to believe herself brought tears to her eyes. "I'm trying to believe that," she whispered. "Believe it," Ethan said fiercely. "You're worth everything." Katherine entered Mrs. Peterson's house with Ethan's words echoing in her mind, a fragile hope kindling in her heart despite the shadow of Thomas's presence in town. That evening, Sheriff Mason paid a visit to Mrs. Peterson's house, his expression somber as he removed his hat in the parlor. "I spoke with your husband, Mrs. Blackwell," he reported. "Made it clear that any attempt to force you to leave Caldwell against your will would result in his arrest." "How did he take it?" Katherine asked, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "About as well as you'd expect." "He claims you're his legal wife and he has every right to take you home." Mason sighed. "And legally speaking, he's not entirely wrong. The law gives husbands considerable authority over their wives." Katherine's heart sank. "So there's nothing you can do?" "I didn't say that," Mason replied. "I made it clear that in my town, I don't tolerate violence against women, married or not. If he lays a hand on you, he'll find himself behind bars faster than he can blink." "Thank you, Sheriff," Mrs. Peterson said, serving him a cup of coffee. "We appreciate your support." Mason nodded, taking the offered cup. "There is something else you should know, Mrs. Blackwell. Your husband mentioned he'll be staying in Caldwell for as long as it takes to resolve the situation. His words. He's taken a room at the hotel, and I've noticed he's been spending time at the saloon. Been asking questions about you and about Quinn." Katherine felt a chill run through her. "What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he's looking for leverage or trying to stir up trouble?" Mason set down his cup. "Just be careful, both of you. Blackwell strikes me as a man with a temper and a grudge, not a good combination." After the sheriff left, Katherine sat alone in her room, staring out the window at the darkening street. Thomas was out there somewhere, plotting, planning. The thought made her skin crawl. 5 years of marriage to the man had taught her to recognize the signs of his building rage. Sheriff Mason had likely seen only Thomas's public face controlled, reasonable, perhaps even charming. He hadn't seen the monster that emerged after too much whiskey, the cold fury that could explode without warning. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Peterson entered, carrying a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might need this," the older woman said, placing the cup on the bedside table. "Chamomile helps settle the nerves." "Thank you," Katherine replied with a grateful smile. Mrs. Peterson sat on the edge of the bed, her usually stern face softened with concern. "I don't usually pry into my boarder's affairs, but I think it's time we had a frank conversation, Mrs. Blackwell." Katherine nodded, waiting. "That man downstairs, your husband, he hurt you badly, didn't he? Not just the bruises we could see when you arrived, but inside too." "Yes," Katherine admitted softly. "For years." Mrs. Peterson's lined face hardened. "I thought as much. My sister was married to a man like that, ended up burying her after he pushed her down the stairs in a drunken rage." She reached out, patting Katherine's hand. "I won't see that happen to you, my dear. This is my house, and you're under my protection while you're here." Katherine was touched by the woman's fierce loyalty. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door, Mrs. Peterson." "Trouble comes whether we invite it or not," the older woman replied philosophically. "The question is how we face it when it arrives." She stood, smoothing her apron. "Now drink your tea and get some rest, and don't worry too much about that man." Between the sheriff, young Mr. Quinn, and half the town who's taken a shine to you, Thomas Blackwell will find it difficult to cause mischief in Caldwell. Despite Mrs. Peterson's reassurances, Katherine slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of Thomas's rage. She awoke before dawn, exhausted but too restless to return to sleep. Dressing quietly, she made her way downstairs to the kitchen, thinking to make breakfast as a way to thank Mrs. Peterson for her support. She was surprised to find Ethan already seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee before him, deep in conversation with Mrs. Peterson. Both looked up as she entered. "You're up early," Ethan observed, rising to his feet. "I couldn't sleep," Katherine admitted. "What are you doing here at this hour?" Mrs. Peterson and Ethan exchanged a glance. "Mr. Quinn spent the night in my parlor," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Given the circumstances, it seemed prudent to have a man in the house." Katherine felt a rush of gratitude, mixed with concern. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," Ethan replied simply, "and I'll be escorting you to work again today." The day passed without incident. Katherine went through the motions at the store, aware of curious glances and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Clearly, the entire town knew about Thomas's arrival and the drama unfolding around his estranged wife. Mr. Forrester was understanding, allowing Katherine to work in the back room when possible, away from prying eyes and the constant fear of Thomas walking through the door. Ethan stopped by at noon, bringing her lunch and a reassuring smile that did more to lift her spirits than any words could have. "Any sign of him?" she asked as they shared a simple meal in the store's back room. "He was at the saloon earlier," Ethan reported. "Sheriff's keeping an eye on him. So far, he's just talking, trying to get people on his side." "Is it working?" Ethan shrugged. Some might sympathize with a husband looking for his runaway wife, but most folks around here have seen what he did to you, at least the marks that were still visible when you arrived. And Caldwell's a town that looks after its own. You're one of us now." The idea that she could belong somewhere, be accepted as part of a community, brought a lump to Katherine's throat. "I've only been here a few weeks." "Sometimes a few weeks is all it takes," Ethan replied with a soft smile. "You've made an impression, Katherine, on the town, and on me." Their eyes met, and Katherine felt the now familiar flutter in her chest. There was something in Ethan's gaze that both thrilled and frightened her, a depth of feeling that mirrored her own confused emotions. Before either could speak further, Mr. Forrester called from the front of the store, needing Katherine's assistance with a customer. The moment passed, but the warmth of it lingered as Katherine returned to her duties. That evening, as Ethan walked her back to Mrs. Peterson's house, they took a more circuitous route than usual, avoiding the main street where Thomas might be watching. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. "I've been thinking," Ethan said as they walked, "about what Sheriff Mason said regarding the law and husbands' rights over their wives." Katherine glanced at him, curious. "What about it?" "There might be a way to challenge those rights. Legally, I mean." Ethan seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've spoken to Judge Wilson. He's circuit judge for this district, happens to be in town this week," he said. "Well, there are grounds for divorce in cases of cruelty." Katherine stopped walking, staring at Ethan in shock. "Divorce? That's almost unheard of." "Not as much as you might think, especially out here in the territories," Ethan replied. "The judge said with evidence of physical abuse and credible witnesses to your condition when you arrived in Caldwell, you might have a case. It wouldn't be easy, and Thomas would surely fight it, but it's possible. The idea was simultaneously terrifying and liberating, to be legally free of Thomas, to no longer be his wife in the eyes of the law or the church. "I'd need to think about it," she said finally. "It's a serious step." "Of course," Ethan agreed quickly. "I just wanted you to know there are options. You don't have to go back with him, Katherine, no matter what he says." They resumed walking, Katherine's mind racing with the possibilities Ethan had presented. Divorce was scandalous, certainly, but was it worse than returning to a life of fear and pain? As they approached Mrs. Peterson's house, Katherine was so lost in thought that she almost didn't notice the figure lounging against the garden gate until it was too late. Thomas straightened as they approached, his eyes cold as they took in the sight of Katherine and Ethan walking side by side. He was dressed in his Sunday best, clearly having made an effort to appear respectable, but Katherine could smell the whiskey on him from several paces away. "Evening, wife," he drawled, his gaze shifting to Ethan with naked hostility. "Out for a stroll with your cowboy?" Ethan stepped slightly in front of Katherine, his posture protective but not aggressive. "Mr. Blackwell, Sheriff Mason explained the situation to you, I believe." "Oh, he explained plenty," Thomas replied, his voice deceptively calm. "Said my wife's been telling tales about me, said I'd be in a cell if I tried to take her home by force." He smiled, an expression that didn't reach his eyes. "But I'm a reasonable man. I've come to talk, not to fight." "I have nothing to say to you, Thomas," Katherine said, finding her voice despite the fear gripping her throat. Thomas's smile tightened. 5 years of marriage and you've got nothing to say to your husband. That's cold, Katherine, especially when I've come all this way to bring you home." "She doesn't want to go with you," Ethan stated firmly, "and this isn't the place for this conversation." "Isn't it?" Thomas took a step forward, his size intimidating as he loomed over both of them. "Seems to me this is exactly the place. Right outside the house where my wife is living with another woman, while she lets this cowboy court her like she's not a married woman." His voice took on an ugly edge. "What would your father say if he could see you now, Katherine, his precious daughter, living in sin?" "I am not living in sin," Katherine replied, anger breaking through her fear. "Mrs. Peterson runs a respectable boarding house, and Mr. Quinn has been nothing but a gentleman. You're the one who broke our marriage vows, Thomas, when you raised your hand to me the first time." Thomas's face darkened. "You ungrateful, that's enough," Ethan interrupted, his voice hard. "Mrs. Blackwell has made her position clear. I suggest you return to your hotel, Mr. Blackwell. Sober up. Think about what's best for everyone." Thomas's gaze shifted to Ethan, hatred evident in his eyes. "You think you can have her? My wife? The woman who swore before God to be mine until death?" "This isn't about me," Ethan replied calmly. "It's about Katherine's right to live without fear." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that made Katherine flinch. "Listen to him, Katherine. So noble, so righteous. Does he know what a disappointment you are as a wife? Does he know you're barren, that your womb is as dry as the desert?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper. "What use does a man like him have for a woman who can't give him sons?" Katherine felt as if she'd been slapped, Thomas's words striking at her deepest insecurity. But before she could respond, Ethan stepped forward, his face tight with controlled anger. "Mrs. Blackwell is worth more than the sons she never gave you," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "Her value isn't in her womb, but in her heart, her mind, her spirit, all the things you were too blind or too drunk to see." Thomas's hand twitched toward his belt and Katherine tensed, expecting violence. But at that moment, The front door of Mrs. Peterson's house swung open, and the older woman emerged, a shotgun cradled in her arms. "I believe you're trespassing on my property, Mr. Blackwell," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice steady as she aimed the weapon in Thomas's general direction. "And upsetting my boarder. I'd take it as a personal favor if you'd remove yourself. Now." For a moment, Katherine thought Thomas might defy even the shotgun, such was the rage in his eyes. But after a tense silence, he stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "Fine, I'm going. But this isn't over, Katherine, not by a long shot." He backed away, his gaze burning into hers. "I'll be at the hotel. Think about what I said. Think about your vows." They watched in silence as Thomas strode away, his back rigid with anger. Only when he had disappeared around the corner did Mrs. Peterson lower her shotgun. "Inside, both of you," she ordered. "That man's had too much to drink, and I don't trust him not to come back." Once inside, with the doors locked and curtains drawn, Katherine collapsed into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. The encounter with Thomas had drained her completely. "I've never seen Mrs. Peterson with a shotgun before," she remarked faintly, attempting to lighten the mood. "Been in the family for years," Mrs. Peterson replied matter-of-factly, placing the weapon in a cabinet. "My late husband taught me to use it, said a woman alone needs to be able to protect herself." Ethan knelt before Katherine, his face grave with concern. "Are you all right? What he said about children, he had no right." Katherine met his gaze, surprised to find no pity there, only anger on her behalf. "It's what he truly believes, that my only value was in giving him sons, and when I couldn't." She trailed off, old shame resurfacing. "He's wrong," Ethan said with quiet conviction. "So wrong that I can't even begin to explain all the ways." He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "Katherine, listen to me. You are not defined by your ability to have children. You are kind, intelligent, brave, and stronger than you know. Any man would be fortunate to have you in his life, children or no." The certainty in his voice, the earnestness in his eyes, made Katherine's heart swell with emotion. In that moment, she knew with absolute clarity that she was falling in love with Ethan Quinn. Perhaps had been falling since the moment he found her on the prairie and offered help without expectation. "Thank you," she whispered, squeezing his hands. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat. "I'll make some tea," she announced, moving toward the kitchen with deliberate steps, giving them a moment of privacy. When she had gone, Ethan's voice dropped lower. "I meant what I said, Katherine, every word, and there's something else I need to tell you." "What is it?" Ethan's expression was solemn. "I'm not just saying these things because I pity you or because I want to protect you from Thomas. I'm saying them because I care for you, more than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." Katherine's breath caught in her throat. "Ethan, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I know it's complicated. You're still married, legally at least, and you've been through so much. The last thing I want is to add to your burden." He stood, releasing her hands. "I just wanted you to know that whatever you decide, whether you pursue a divorce, reconcile with Thomas, or choose another path entirely, I will respect your decision, and I'll help you however I can." Katherine was stunned by his declaration, by the depth of feeling he had expressed while still respecting her autonomy. It was so unlike Thomas's possessive love, his insistence that she belonged to him. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything right now," Ethan assured her. "Just think about what you want, Katherine, not what Thomas wants or what I want or what anyone else expects. What do you want for your life?" It was a question no one had ever asked her before, and Katherine found she didn't have an immediate answer. What did she want? Freedom from Thomas, certainly. Safety. But beyond that, the answer came to her with surprising clarity. She wanted a chance to discover who she was outside of marriage, outside of Thomas's shadow. She wanted the opportunity to build a life on her own terms. And perhaps, if she was brave enough to admit it, she wanted the chance to love again, not out of obligation or social expectation, but from choice. "I want to be free," she said finally, "free to make my own choices, even if they're difficult ones." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then that's what we'll work toward." The next morning, Katherine made a decision. After a restless night considering her options, she asked Ethan to accompany her to see Judge Wilson about the possibility of divorce. The judge, a stern but fair man with a reputation for progressive views on women's rights, received them in his temporary office at the courthouse. "Mrs. Blackwell, Mr. Quinn," he greeted them, gesturing for them to sit. "Sheriff Mason mentioned you might be coming to see me." Katherine sat rigidly, her hands folded in her lap, nervous about the step she was contemplating. "I want to know my options, Your Honor, regarding ending my marriage." Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "Divorce is a serious matter, Mrs. Blackwell, not to be entered into lightly. The law generally favors the preservation of marriage." He leaned forward, his expression softening slightly. "But there are exceptions, particularly in cases of cruelty or abandonment." "My husband beat me," Katherine said bluntly. "Regularly for years, because I couldn't give him children. The last time he nearly killed me, I fled for my life." The judge's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected sympathy. "Do you have witnesses to these beatings? Or to your condition afterward? Mr. Quinn found me after the last incident, and Mrs. Peterson, with whom I board, saw my injuries when I first arrived in Caldwell. As did Sheriff Mason and Dr. Miller, who treated me." Wilson made some notes on a pad of paper, "And your husband's defense would likely be—" Katherine hesitated. "He would say I was clumsy, that I fell, or that I deserved correction for some perceived failing." She swallowed hard. "He might also claim that I've been improper with Mr. Quinn, which is absolutely untrue." The judge glanced at Ethan, who had remained silent thus far. "I see. And your interest in this matter, Mr. Quinn?" "I'm here as Mrs. Blackwell's friend and advocate," Ethan replied firmly. "Nothing more." Wilson studied them both for a long moment. "Mrs. Blackwell, I won't sugarcoat this for you. Divorce proceedings are difficult, often humiliating for the woman. Your character will be questioned, your private life examined. Mr. Blackwell will likely fight this with everything he has." He sighed. "That said, from what Sheriff Mason has told me, and from what I can see of your remaining injuries, you have legitimate grounds for divorce on the basis of cruelty." Hope blossomed in Katherine's chest. "Then you'll help me. I can begin the proceedings," Wilson confirmed. "It will take time, months, possibly longer if your husband contests it vigorously. And I must warn you, the outcome is not guaranteed, but yes, I'll help you." Katherine felt a wave of relief so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you." As they left the courthouse, Katherine felt lighter than she had in years, despite the long road ahead. The mere possibility of legal freedom from Thomas was more than she had dared to hope for. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked as they walked. "It won't be easy." "I'm sure," Katherine replied with newfound determination. "I can't go back to him, Ethan. I won't. Even if I have to fight for years, it's worth it to be free." Ethan smiled, pride evident in his expression. "You're the bravest person I know, Katherine Blackwell." The warmth of his words carried her through the rest of the day, even as she prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Thomas once he learned of her plans. Sheriff Mason had agreed to serve Thomas with the initial papers, a task Katherine was grateful to avoid. That evening, Katherine was working late at the store, finishing the monthly accounts for Mr. Forrester when the bell above the door jingled. Looking up, she was startled to see Thomas enter, his face flushed with anger. "You're filing for divorce," he demanded without preamble, slapping the papers down on the counter. "After everything I've done for you," Katherine stood, placing the counter between them like a shield. "Please leave, Thomas. The store is closed." "I'm not going anywhere until you explain this," Thomas snarled, his voice rising. "You think you can just throw away 5 years of marriage? You think any judge will grant a divorce to a woman who ran off with another man?" "I didn't run off with anyone," Katherine replied, struggling to keep her voice calm. "I fled for my life after you beat me unconscious. And yes, I'm filing for divorce. I won't be your wife any longer, Thomas. Not in name and certainly not in heart." Thomas's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore. I gave you everything: a home, a name, respect in the community. And this is how you repay me? By dragging my name through the mud with false accusations." "There's nothing false about the bruises you left on me," Katherine countered, a newfound courage filling her. "Nothing false about the fear I lived with every day. Nothing false about the cruel words you used to break my spirit." Thomas moved around the counter so quickly that Katherine had no time to retreat. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You're my wife," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "Mine. And if you think I'll let you go without a fight, you're even stupider than I thought." Fear flooded Katherine, the familiar terror of being in Thomas's grip nearly overwhelming her. But alongside it was something new, a fierce determination not to be his victim again. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Let go, or I'll scream this building down, and then you can explain to Sheriff Mason and half the town why you're assaulting me. Again." For a moment, Thomas's grip tightened and Katherine thought he might strike her despite the risk. Then, slowly, his hand released her arm. "This isn't over," he warned, stepping back. "Not by a long shot. You want a fight, Katherine? I'll give you one. By the time I'm done, everyone in this town will know what kind of woman you really are." "They already know," came a voice from the doorway. Ethan stood there, his expression hard as he took in the scene before him. "They know she's a woman of courage and dignity who deserves better than a coward who beats his wife." Thomas whirled to face him. This is your doing, isn't it? Filling her head with notions, turning her against me." "Katherine makes her own decisions," Ethan replied evenly. "I'm just here to make sure she's safe while she does it." Thomas's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. "Maybe I should solve both our problems right now." Katherine moved forward, placing herself between the two men. "Stop it, both of you. This isn't helping anything." Thomas's lip curled in disgust. Defending him now, how touching. He stepped back, his hand falling away from his gun. "Fine, have it your way for now. But this isn't over, Katherine, not until I say it is." With a final venomous glare, he stormed out of the store, leaving the door swinging wildly behind him. Katherine sagged against the counter, her legs suddenly weak. Ethan was at her side in an instant. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" His hands gently examined the arm Thomas had gripped, his touch so different from her husband's brutality that tears sprang to Katherine's eyes. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her voice trembled. He was angry about the divorce papers. "I knew I should have come earlier," Ethan muttered, self-recrimination in his voice. "Mason told me he'd serve the papers this afternoon. I should have been here." "You're here now," Katherine said softly, placing her hand on his arm, "and I'm all right. Really." Ethan's eyes met hers, filled with concern and something deeper, something that made Katherine's heart race. "He's dangerous, Katherine, more so now that you've challenged him legally." "I know," she admitted, "but I can't live in fear of him forever. I won't." Ethan nodded, respect evident in his gaze. Then we'll face whatever comes together. I promise you that. The promise sustained Katherine through the difficult days that followed. Thomas remained in town, a menacing presence that she glimpsed occasionally on the street or in the store. He had begun a campaign to discredit her, spreading rumors about her character and suggesting impropriety between her and Ethan. Some in town believed him. There were always those who sided with a husband over a wife, but many more stood firmly with Katherine. Impressed by her quiet dignity in the face of Thomas's increasingly desperate attempts to control her. Judge Wilson had set a date for the initial hearing, 2 weeks hence, when he would return to Caldwell on his circuit. In the meantime, Katherine continued working at the store, grateful for the routine and for Mr. Forrester's unwavering support. Ethan divided his time between his duties at the ranch and escorting Katherine whenever possible, his protective presence a comfort she came to rely on. One evening, about a week after filing for divorce, Katherine was returning home from the store alone. Ethan had been delayed at the ranch, and she had assured him she would be fine walking the short distance to Mrs. Peterson's house in broad daylight. The main street was busy with the usual late afternoon activity, shopkeepers closing up, ranch hands coming into town for the evening, families heading home for supper. Katherine was nearly at Mrs. Peterson's gate when a rough hand seized her arm, pulling her into the narrow alley between two buildings. Thomas's face loomed before her, his eyes bright with dangerous intensity. "We need to talk," he said, backing her against the wall of the building. "Away from your cowboy protector." Katherine glanced toward the street, but they were hidden from view by a stack of crates. Fear clutched at her throat, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Let me go, Thomas. People will be looking for me." "Let them look," he snarled. "You're still my wife, and I have the right to speak to you." "You have no rights over me anymore," Katherine replied, striving for a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "The divorce proceedings have begun." Thomas laughed harshly. "Do you really think a judge will grant a divorce to a woman who's been carrying on with another man?" "I've been watching you, Katherine, you and Quinn. The whole town sees how it is between you." "There's nothing improper between Mr. Quinn and me," Katherine insisted. "He's been a gentleman and a friend, nothing more." "Liar," Thomas hissed, his face inches from hers. "I see how you look at him." "How he looks at you, my wife, lusting after another man." Katherine tried to pull away, but Thomas's grip tightened painfully. "You're hurting me. Again. Just proving why I needed to leave you." Something dangerous flashed in Thomas's eyes. "I could hurt you a lot worse, Katherine. You know that better than anyone." His voice dropped to a malevolent whisper. "Or maybe I should hurt your cowboy instead. How would you feel if Quinn had an accident? These frontier towns can be dangerous places." Cold fear washed over Katherine. "You wouldn't I?" Thomas's smile was cruel. "A man will go to great lengths to protect what's his, and you are mine, Katherine, until death do us part." The threat against Ethan galvanized Katherine in a way that fear for herself never had. With sudden, desperate strength, she brought her knee up sharply, catching Thomas in the groin. He doubled over with a grunt of pain, his grip loosening enough for her to wrench free. "I am not yours," she said, backing away. "I never truly was. And if you hurt Ethan, if you even try, I'll make sure you hang for it." Thomas's face contorted with rage as he straightened, reaching for her again. But at that moment, a figure appeared at the entrance to the alley. Sheriff Mason, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Everything all right here?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he knew it wasn't. "Just having a private conversation with my wife, Sheriff," Thomas replied, his public face sliding back into place. "Nothing that concerns the law." "Is that right, Mrs. Blackwell?" Mason asked, his gaze fixed on Catherine's pale face. He threatened me, Katherine said, her voice steadier than she expected. And Mr. Quinn as well. Mason's expression hardened. That's so. Well, Mr. Blackwell, in my town, threats are very much the law's concern. I think you'd better come with me. On what charge? Thomas demanded indignantly. I have the right to speak to my own wife. Threatening bodily harm is a charge, Mason replied calmly. So is assault, which is what Mrs. Peterson over there witnessed when you grabbed Mrs. Blackwell and dragged her into this alley. Katherine looked past the sheriff to see Mrs. Peterson standing on the street, her expression grimly satisfied. This is ridiculous, Thomas blustered. It's my word against hers, and she's proven herself a liar by running away from her marriage vows. Actually, Mason said, it's your word against hers and Mrs. Peterson's and mine. I saw you grab her too. His hand moved deliberately to his gun. Now, are you coming to the jail quietly, or do we need to make this more difficult? Thomas's face darkened with fury, but he wasn't fool enough to challenge an armed sheriff. Fine, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. As Mason escorted Thomas away, Mrs. Peterson hurried to Katherine's side. Are you all right, my dear? I was watching for you from the window when I saw him pull you into the alley. I'm fine, Katherine assured her, though she was shaking with reaction. Just frightened. Of course you are. That man is dangerous. Mrs. Peterson put a supportive arm around Katherine's shoulders. Come inside. I'll make tea, and we'll wait for the sheriff to return. He'll want to take your statement. Later that evening, after giving her account to Sheriff Mason and being assured that Thomas would remain in jail at least overnight, Katherine sat in Mrs. Peterson's parlor, still rattled by the encounter. The older woman had gone to bed, leaving Katherine alone with her thoughts when a soft knock came at the front door. Opening it cautiously, Katherine found Ethan standing on the porch, his expression tight with concern. I just heard what happened, he said. Mason told me when I came into town. Are you all right? I am now, she replied, stepping back to allow him inside. In the soft lamplight of the parlor, Katherine told Ethan about Thomas's threats, including those directed at Ethan himself. To her surprise, Ethan seemed more concerned about the threats to her than those against him. I can take care of myself, he assured her, but the fact that he'd corner you like that, threaten you, it confirms what we already knew. He's dangerous, Katherine. Sheriff Mason says he can only hold him for a day or two without formal charges, Katherine said worriedly. And even though Mrs. Peterson witnessed him grabbing me, it might not be enough for more serious charges. Ethan's expression was grave. Then we need to be extra careful until the hearing. I don't think Thomas will give up easily. He won't, Katherine agreed, not when his pride is at stake. She hesitated, then added quietly, he threatened to hurt you, Ethan. He said there might be an accident. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let him try. I've faced worse than Thomas Blackwell. That's just it, Katherine said, distress evident in her voice. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Perhaps it would be better if you kept your distance until after the hearing. Not a chance, Ethan replied firmly. I'm not abandoning you to face him alone, Katherine. Not now, not ever, unless that's truly what you want. He paused, studying her face. Is it? Do you want me to stay away? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with significance. Katherine knew the sensible answer, the proper answer, would be yes. To protect Ethan, to avoid giving Thomas more ammunition for his claims of impropriety, she should keep her distance. But the thought of facing the coming weeks without Ethan's steady presence, his unwavering support, was unbearable. And beyond that, there was the growing realization that what she felt for him was far more than gratitude or friendship. No, she finally admitted. I don't want you to stay away. I'm stronger when you're near, Ethan. Braver. Ethan's expression softened. You've always been brave, Katherine. You just needed to remember it. He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek before dropping back to his side, mindful of propriety even now. We'll get through this, together. The 2 weeks leading up to the hearing passed in a state of heightened tension. Thomas, released from jail after a night's detention, and a stern warning from Sheriff Mason, continued his campaign against Katherine, now extending his accusations to include Ethan more directly. Several times, he attempted to confront Katherine in public, only to be intercepted by Ethan, Sheriff Mason, or one of the many townspeople who had taken it upon themselves to act as her informal protectors. Katherine was touched by the community's support. Mrs. Peterson never let her walk anywhere alone. Mr. Forrester arranged his schedule so that Ethan or the sheriff could be present when the store closed. Even Martha Williams from the livery took to stopping by the store daily, ostensibly to chat, but clearly checking on Katherine's welfare. Through it all, Ethan remained a constant presence, his quiet strength and unwavering support a bulwark against Thomas's escalating hostility. Katherine found herself looking forward to their brief moments alone walking to and from work, sharing lunch in the store's back room, the occasional evening spent in Mrs. Peterson's parlor discussing books or their hopes for the future. It was during one such evening, just days before the hearing, that Katherine finally gave voice to the feelings that had been growing in her heart. "Ethan," she began hesitantly, setting aside the book they had been discussing, "there's something I need to say." He looked up, his expression attentive. "What is it?" Katherine took a deep breath. "These past weeks have been the most frightening of my life in many ways, but they've also been illuminating. I've discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed. I've found a community that values me for myself, not for what I can or cannot provide." She paused, gathering her courage. "And I've found you." Ethan remained silent, though his eyes never left hers, encouraging her to continue. "What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that you've become important to me, more than important." Katherine felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment at her own boldness. "I care for you, Ethan, deeply. In a way I never thought I could care for anyone again after what happened with Thomas." Ethan's expression softened, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Katherine, please let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I know the timing is terrible. I'm still married, at least legally. There's the hearing, and who knows what Thomas might do next. And I understand completely if you don't feel the same way. You've been kind and protective, but that doesn't mean—" "Katherine," Ethan said again, more firmly this time. He reached across the small space between them, taking her hand in his. "I've been trying to be a gentleman, to respect your situation, to give you the space and time you need. But the truth is, I've cared for you since the day I found you on the prairie." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Maybe even before that, in some way I can't explain." Joy and disbelief warred in Katherine's heart. "Truly, truly," Ethan confirmed, his blue eyes warm with sincerity. "I love your courage, your kindness, the way you faced everything life has thrown at you with dignity and grace. I love the person you are and the person you're becoming as you discover your own strength." He squeezed her hand gently. "I love you, Katherine, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be free, truly free to decide what you want." Tears filled Katherine's eyes, but they were tears of happiness, not sorrow. "I already know what I want," she whispered. "I want a future where I'm not afraid, where I can build a life on my own terms, and, if you'll have me, I want that future to include you." Ethan's smile was radiant. "Nothing would make me happier." For a moment they sat in silence, hands entwined, the promise of a shared future hanging between them like a tangible thing. Then, with evident reluctance, Ethan released her hand and stood. "It's getting late," he said, "and you need rest before the hearing." Katherine nodded, though she was reluctant for the evening to end. "Will you be there? At the hearing, I mean." "Wild horses couldn't keep me away," Ethan promised. The day of the hearing dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of Katherine's bid for freedom. She dressed carefully in her best dress, a modest blue frock that Mrs. Peterson had helped her alter to fit properly, her hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck. She wanted to present a picture of respectability and dignity before the judge. Ethan arrived to escort her to the courthouse, his own appearance more formal than usual in a clean suit and freshly trimmed hair. His presence beside her gave Katherine courage as they walked through town, aware of curious eyes following their progress. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. It seemed half of Caldwell had turned out to witness the proceedings, their collective presence both comforting and intimidating. Thomas was already seated at one of the tables at the front of the room, dressed in his Sunday best, his expression carefully composed into one of solemn dignity. Judge Wilson entered, and the room rose to its feet. As the proceedings began, Katherine tried to focus on the judge's words, but her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that she caught only fragments. Thomas's attorney, a slick-looking man from Sweetwater, who specialized in defending husbands against frivolous claims from wives, spoke at length about the sanctity of marriage, the biblical duty of wives to obey their husbands, and the suspicious circumstances of Katherine's departure from the marital home. When it was Katherine's turn to speak, she rose on shaky legs, conscious of every eye in the room upon her. With a deep breath, she began to tell her story, the early years of marriage when Thomas had been merely controlling, the growing cruelty as her failure to conceive became apparent, the escalating violence that had culminated in the beating that nearly killed her. Thomas's attorney attempted to paint her as unstable, suggesting that her injuries were self-inflicted or the result of accidents. But one by one, witnesses came forward to support Katherine's account. Ethan, describing the state in which he had found her on the prairie. Mrs. Peterson, testifying to the extent of Katherine's injuries when she arrived in Caldwell. Dr. Miller, providing medical confirmation of the abuse. And finally, Sheriff Mason, detailing Thomas's threatening behavior since arriving in town. Throughout it all, Thomas sat stone-faced, his eyes burning with a cold fury that made Katherine shiver. When he took the stand, he presented himself as a devoted husband, baffled and heartbroken by his wife's sudden departure and her false accusations against him. "I have never raised a hand to my wife in anger," he declared, his voice ringing with apparent sincerity. "Katherine has always been delicate, prone to fits of melancholy, especially after it became clear she couldn't bear children." He sighed heavily, the picture of a concerned husband. "I believe she may have fallen and injured herself, then in her confused state blamed me. It broke my heart to learn she had fled, possibly under the influence of certain parties, who may have their own interests in separating a man from his lawful wife." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Ethan, and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Katherine felt sick at the ease with which Thomas lied, at how convincing he could be when it suited his purposes. The hearing stretched into the afternoon, both sides presenting their arguments. Finally, Judge Wilson called for a brief recess to consider his decision. As the courtroom emptied, Katherine remained seated, too drained to move. Ethan stayed beside her, a silent pillar of support. "He's very convincing," Katherine whispered, her voice hollow. "What if the judge believes him?" "The evidence speaks for itself," Ethan replied, though concern lined his face. "And Wilson is a fair man. He'll see the truth." When the judge returned to the bench, the courtroom fell silent, tension thick in the air. "I've considered the testimony presented today," Wilson began, his expression grave. "Divorce is not a matter I take lightly. Marriage is indeed a sacred bond, not to be dissolved on a whim or for trivial disagreements." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Katherine. "However, the law recognizes that there are circumstances in which the continuation of a marriage would cause undue hardship or danger. Cruelty is one such circumstance." Hope flickered in Katherine's chest as Wilson continued. "In this case, the evidence of physical abuse is compelling. Multiple witnesses have testified to Mrs. Blackwell's injuries, and the pattern of controlling and threatening behavior described is consistent with that of an abusive husband." Wilson's gaze shifted to Thomas. Mr. Blackwell's denials ring hollow in the face of such evidence, particularly given his demonstrated hostility toward Mrs. Blackwell since her arrival in Caldwell. Thomas started to rise, his face flushing with anger, but his attorney pulled him back down. "Therefore," the judge continued, "I am granting Mrs. Blackwell's petition for divorce on the grounds of cruelty. The marriage between Katherine Blackwell and Thomas Blackwell is hereby dissolved." A collective gasp went through the courtroom, followed by scattered applause quickly silenced by the judge's stern glance. "Additionally," Wilson added, "I am issuing an order of protection, forbidding Mr. Blackwell from approaching or communicating with Mrs. Blackwell. Any violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." He banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." Katherine sat frozen, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. Free. She was free. Legally, officially free of Thomas and the prison her marriage had become. Ethan's hand found hers beneath the table, squeezing gently. "It's over," he murmured. "You did it, Katherine." Before she could respond, Thomas surged to his feet, shaking off his attorney's restraining hand. "This is a travesty," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "She's my wife, mine." He lunged toward Katherine, only to be intercepted by Sheriff Mason and several deputies who had anticipated trouble. "Take him to cool off in a cell," Mason ordered as Thomas struggled in their grip. "Seems Mr. Blackwell needs a reminder about respecting the court's decisions." As Thomas was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities, Katherine sagged against Ethan, the enormity of what had just occurred washing over her. "I can't believe it's really over," she whispered. "Believe it," Ethan replied, his arm supportive around her shoulders. "You're free, Katherine. Free to build whatever life you choose." Outside the courthouse, well-wishers surrounded them: Mrs. Peterson, Mr. Forrester, Martha Williams, and dozens of others who had stood by Katherine throughout her ordeal. Their congratulations and expressions of support were a balm to her spirit, a reminder that she was no longer alone in the world as she had been during the dark years of her marriage. That evening, a small celebration was held at Mrs. Peterson's house. Katherine, overwhelmed by the day's events, eventually slipped away to the porch, needing a moment of quiet to process everything that had happened. Ethan found her there, staring up at the stars scattered across the Nebraska sky. "Penny for your thoughts," he said softly, joining her at the porch railing. Katherine smiled. "I was thinking about how much has changed in such a short time. A few months ago, I was trapped in a life I thought would never end. Now—" She gestured to the town spread out before them, to the house behind them where friends celebrated her freedom. "Now I have this, a community, work I enjoy, people who care about me for who I am, not for what I can or cannot provide." "And what's next?" Ethan asked. "Now that you're free to choose," Katherine turned to face him, her heart full. "That depends," she said softly, "on what options are available to me." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Katherine Bennett," he said, deliberately using her maiden name. "I love you. I have from almost the moment I met you, though I tried to hide it to give you space to heal and find your own strength." He took her hands in his. "I don't want to rush you. You've only just gained your freedom, and if you need time to simply be yourself, to discover who you are outside of marriage, I understand completely." "But," Katherine prompted, sensing there was more, "but I want you to know that whenever you're ready, whether that's a month from now, a year, or longer, I'll be here, hoping you might consider building a life with me." Ethan's voice was earnest, his hands warm around hers. "Not as a woman defined by her ability to bear children, but as a partner, equal in all things. I don't care if we never have a family beyond the two of us. You're enough, Katherine, just as you are." Tears sprang to Katherine's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. For so long she had been told she was incomplete, inadequate. To hear Ethan say she was enough, just as she was, healed something broken deep within her. "I love you too, Ethan Quinn," she whispered. "And I don't need time to know that I want a future with you, but perhaps we could court properly first." She smiled shyly. "I've never been courted before. Thomas and I married quickly at my father's arrangement." Ethan's face lit with joy and tenderness. "I would be honored to court you, Katherine Bennett. To bring you flowers and take you on picnics and dance with you at every social from here to Denver." His hand gently cupped her cheek. "May I kiss you?" "Our first kiss as free people, choosing each other." Katherine nodded, her heart racing as Ethan leaned down to press his lips softly against hers. The kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of all that might be between them. When they pulled apart, Katherine felt as though she was truly beginning a new chapter of her life, not as Thomas Blackwell's wife, or even as Katherine Bennett, the shopkeeper's daughter, but as herself, a woman of strength and worth, capable of giving and receiving love on her own terms. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Thomas is still in town, still angry." "Sheriff Mason will make sure he leaves Caldwell," Ethan assured her. "And if he doesn't, if he tries to cause more trouble, we'll face it together. But I don't think he will. Men like Thomas are cowards at heart. Without the law on his side, he'll likely slink back to Sweetwater to lick his wounds." Katherine hoped Ethan was right. The thought of Thomas lingering in Caldwell, plotting revenge, cast a shadow over her newfound happiness. As if sensing her concern, Ethan added, "Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore, Katherine. You have me and Mrs. Peterson and half the town behind you. You're one of us now." One of us. The simple phrase filled Katherine with a profound sense of belonging. After years of isolation in her marriage, she had found a community, a place where she was valued for herself. "I like the sound of that," she said softly. They returned to the party hand in hand, their new relationship evident to all who saw them. There were knowing smiles and a few playful teasing comments, but overall, the town's reaction was one of approval and support. Katherine had proven herself to be a woman of character and strength. Ethan was respected as a man of integrity and kindness. Together, they made sense in a way that everyone could see. In the days that followed, Katherine learned from Sheriff Mason that Thomas had indeed left town. His departure hastened by the clear understanding that he was no longer welcome in Caldwell. The relief she felt was immense, though a small part of her remained wary, uncertain if he had truly accepted his defeat. But as weeks passed with no sign of trouble, Katherine gradually allowed herself to relax into her new life and her burgeoning relationship with Ethan. True to his word, he courted her properly, bringing flowers, taking her for walks on pleasant evenings, sitting beside her at church on Sundays. Their courtship became the talk of the town, a romantic tale that people recounted with approval and affection. 3 months after the divorce, on a perfect autumn day, Ethan took Katherine on a picnic to the spot where he had first found her on the prairie. The wildflowers were gone, replaced by the golden hues of fall grasses swaying in the breeze. "You remember that night?" Ethan asked as they sat on a blanket, sharing a simple meal. "Parts of it," Katherine admitted. "I remember being so afraid and in so much pain, and then seeing your campfire like a beacon of hope." She smiled at the memory. "And I remember waking up to find you whittling, looking at me with such concern in your eyes." Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out a small wooden carving, a delicate rose, intricately detailed. "I was carving this that morning," he said, placing it in her hand. "It reminded me of the roses my mother used to grow in Virginia, strong, beautiful flowers that bloomed even after harsh winters." Katherine traced the petals with her finger, touched by the gift and its meaning. "It's beautiful, Ethan. Like you," he replied simply. Then, to her surprise, he shifted to one knee before her, taking her free hand in his. "Katherine Bennett, these past months have been the happiest of my life. Watching you grow stronger, seeing you build a life on your own terms, falling more deeply in love with you each day." He paused, his blue eyes intent on hers. "I know it hasn't been long since your divorce, and if you need more time, I understand completely. But I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Joy welled up in Katherine's heart, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Ethan Quinn, I will marry you." Ethan's face broke into a radiant smile as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I've been carrying it with me since the war, waiting for the right woman to give it to. I never thought I'd find her on the Nebraska prairie." Katherine laughed through her tears, pulling him up to sit beside her. "And I never thought I'd find happiness again after escaping Thomas. We've both been surprised, it seems." Their wedding, held in Caldwell's small church on a crisp December day, was attended by the entire town. Katherine wore a new dress of ivory silk, a gift from the ladies of the community who had banded together to ensure she had a proper bridal gown. Ethan, handsome in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with undisguised adoration in his eyes. Mrs. Peterson gave the bride away, her usual stern demeanor softened by evident emotion as she placed Katherine's hand in Ethan's. "Take care of each other," she instructed them both, her voice gruff with feeling. "We will," they promised in unison. The celebration afterward was joyous, the town hall decorated with evergreens and ribbons, tables laden with food prepared by dozens of households. As Katherine danced in Ethan's arms, surrounded by people who had become like family to her, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. "Happy," Ethan murmured, holding her close as they swayed to the music. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "And no regrets about the children we may never have." It was the first time since his proposal that Ethan had directly mentioned her presumed infertility, and Katherine appreciated the honesty of the question. "None," she assured him. "We'll have each other, and who knows? Perhaps someday we might adopt a child who needs a home. There are plenty of orphans in this world who could use parents who would love them for exactly who they are." Ethan's eyes shone with love and pride. "You're an extraordinary woman, Katherine Quinn. And I'm the luckiest man alive to call you my wife." As spring bloomed over the Nebraska prairie the following year, Katherine found herself facing an unexpected turn of events. After months of thinking herself barren, she discovered she was with child. The town doctor confirmed what she had begun to suspect: the morning sickness, the tenderness, the subtle changes in her body. When she told Ethan the news, his joy was boundless. "A baby," he whispered, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." I never thought it would be possible, Katherine admitted, still stunned by the revelation. After 5 years with Thomas. Perhaps it wasn't you who couldn't have children, Ethan suggested gently. Or perhaps it was the stress, the fear you lived with, Doctor. Miller says such things can affect a woman's ability to conceive. The possibility that Thomas's cruelty might have been the reason for her childlessness, not some defect in her own body, was simultaneously liberating and infuriating. All those years of blame and shame, for nothing. It doesn't matter now, Katherine decided, placing her hand over Ethan's. What matters is that we're going to have a child born of love, not obligation. Their daughter, Elizabeth Rose Quinn, was born on a warm September day with Mrs. Peterson serving as midwife and half the town, pacing anxiously outside the Quinn home. She had Katherine's dark hair and Ethan's blue eyes, and from the moment she drew her first breath, she was the center of her parents' world. As Katherine held her daughter in her arms, Ethan beside her with wonder and love in his eyes, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the depths of despair in her first marriage to the heights of joy in her second, from believing herself worthless to knowing herself deeply valued, from loneliness to community. It had been a path she could never have imagined when she fled into the night from Thomas's brutality. "She's perfect," Ethan whispered, gently stroking their daughter's tiny hand. "She is," Katherine agreed, "and she's ours." In the years that followed, the Quinn family grew. To everyone's surprise, Katherine gave birth to twin boys 2 years after Elizabeth's arrival, disproving once and for all the notion that she was barren. The town of Caldwell grew as well, the railroad bringing new settlers, new businesses, new opportunities. Ethan eventually bought the livery from Martha Williams's husband when he retired, expanding it into a successful business that included not only boarding horses but breeding and training them. Katherine continued working part-time at Forrester's store, balancing her duties there with motherhood and her role as Ethan's partner in the livery business. They never heard directly from Thomas Blackwell again, though occasional rumors drifted back to Caldwell of his remarriage and subsequent divorce, when his second wife also failed to provide him with sons. Katherine felt a distant pity for the man, who had never understood that a woman's worth lay in far more than her ability to bear children. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival in Caldwell, Katherine stood on the porch of the comfortable home she shared with Ethan and their children, watching the sunset paint the prairie in hues of gold and pink. So much had changed in a decade. The town had grown, their family had expanded, their businesses had prospered. But the greatest change had been within herself. Ethan joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Quinn." Katherine smiled, leaning into his embrace. "I was thinking about value," she replied. "About worth. About how sometimes we have to lose everything we thought defined us to discover who we truly are." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And who is Katherine Quinn when all is said and done?" Katherine considered the question, looking out at the town that had become her home, the life she had built with the man beside her, the children playing in the yard, children she had once believed she would never have. "She's a woman who discovered her own worth," Katherine said finally, turning to face the man who had helped her see it, "and found she was worth so much more than sons,